I wanted to comment on the Biggest Loser documentary that came out on Netflix a few weeks ago. I never watched the Biggest Loser show in the early 2000s when it came out, and looking at it now in the context of wokeness and cancel culture and the way we think about overweight people today, it's pretty shocking. I mean, I was blown away by some of the stuff they had them doing on that show and the way they were treated and the way that whole world was presented. It just shows, yeah, how far we've come since then, and what we will and will not tolerate as a society, I guess. I'll just give you some of the highlights. The producers now admit that they wanted the contestants to puke during their workouts, and they deliberately set up scenarios where they would be embarrassed and risk injury. That they admitted they didn't listen to the show's medical advisor. They encouraged the people to eat junk food, even incentivizing it by dangling the carrot of the opportunity to see their families, who they were otherwise sequestered from during the filming. Bob Harper, the other big trainer on the show, who made his name on the show, who wasn't Jillian Michaels, actually admitted in an interview for the documentary he'd never trained obese people before. He had no experience with that. Now, to be fair, I mean, the show aired originally more than 20 years ago, and clearly, attitudes about how to train overweight, obese people and just how to work out in general were very, very different. I know the thinking back then was, tough love works. That most people thought about obesity and alcoholism, actually, for that matter, as sort of being in the same class, and it being a matter of a lack of willpower, rather than an addiction or a psychological condition that needs to be addressed, via a number of different therapies. We didn't know as much about the mental side of obesity back then, how powerful food cravings can be. That's a big reason why Ozempic and the semaglutide shots now are such a big deal, because they bring down that voice in your head that is telling you to eat, that compels you to eat. They control appetite, and it has a mental effect on you. So The Biggest Loser made it seem like losing weight was all about burning calories. This is, as long as you're hitting it really, really hard and working yourself into the ground, you'll burn off the excess fat, and you'll get lean. And now we know it's much more about diet and lifestyle. Looking at it now, that show probably did more to convince the average person that weight loss was more about intensity than consistency than probably any other entity in the history of fitness. It warped the perception of what exercise for weight loss looks like. And part of the problem was that the show made the classic mistake of not acknowledging the physical limitations that overweight and obese people have when it comes to exercise. It kept beating this drum that if they just worked hard, they would see changes. They ignored the fact that these people had joint issues, they had maybe heart conditions or pre-existing conditions that precluded them from actually getting what most average gym goers would consider a normal workout. They couldn't do the things that healthier, lighter people can do when they go into the gym for the first time. They had them running and jumping, even doing plyometrics and gymnastics, which is totally ridiculous for people of that size. And the producers excuse all this by just saying it made for good TV. So incidentally, I met Bob Harper back in those days. He came in the first time to the men's fitness office. I talked to him about the show and what it was like training obese people, and to be fair, he was a very nice guy. He seemed to be very sincere in his desire to help people lose weight. But I remember the most interesting thing about that interview to me was what he said about how he got started as a trainer, or a celebrity trainer in Hollywood, which I guess is what eventually led to him being on the show. He had moved to Hollywood. He met Ellen DeGeneres at a party, and I guess they struck up a conversation, and she said to him, I heard that you, this is all from Bob Harper telling me, she said to him, I heard that you're a trainer. And he said, yeah. And she's like, well, but you have a cocktail in your hand, you're drinking. And he goes, yeah, I'm at a party. And she said to him, well, if you're that kind of trainer, you're the kind of trainer for me. And so that was it. It just proving that, again, it's not about what you know, it's who you know. And because he was casual enough to be drinking a cocktail at a party, she hired him as her personal trainer. And I guess that led to connections that eventually got him on the show. The second time I interviewed him, he was on the cover of Men's Fitness. He just got into CrossFit personally, and I guess he was integrating CrossFit workouts into the Biggest Loser show at that time, because that was suddenly his new passion. And he was telling me things like, oh, I'm doing power cleans now, and snatches and box jumps and burpees, and and muscle-ups in the rings and all this stuff. Like all these exercises I'd never heard of before. I didn't know about them. And I remember kind of snickering to myself and, chuckling about it, thinking like, just this guy's a trainer and like he's been in the business how long, and these exercises were all foreign to him. And I remember his quote was, I used to, laugh at guys in the gym who were grunting when they lifted weights. I thought that was so stupid. And now I'm one of those guys, ha ha ha. And I just felt like, wow, he just doesn't seem like he's really into this lifestyle that much. I don't know what his experience was prior to all this fame, but he really didn't seem like he was that knowledgeable or experienced. But again, he was a nice guy. I think he's a clever, smart guy. I think his heart was probably in the right place. I just, the way he came across in that show, and he very well was probably goaded by the producers into behaving that way. But the way he came across in that show was pretty bad. By today's standards, certainly, and even then. So anyway, in the conclusion of the documentary, they explained that basically most of the people ended up gaining a lot of the weight back. And they gained it back because they couldn't maintain the lifestyle. And how could they? Because it was so extreme and so restrictive. Of course they were going to gain the weight back. And so they kept excusing every crazy thing they did in that show with this notion that it made for good TV and it was entertaining, and how else would they get America to watch, a weight loss fitness show? My rebuttal to that would be, look at the Jack LaLanne show. I know nobody remembers that now, but from 1951 to 1985, it is one of the longest running shows in the history of television. Jack LaLanne was a bodybuilder in the 40s and 50s and one of the first real fitness gurus. He had a chain of gyms, and yes, the juicing machine, that was his too. He did these feats of strength where he swam through San Francisco Bay, he was shackled, and he was towing boats. That Jack LaLanne. He was very successful for decades with a TV show that was just focused on the same audience that The Biggest Loser had, basically. It was sedentary people at home who were overweight, who wanted to get in better shape and be more active. Showed them practical ways that they could do that. There was no torturing anybody, screaming in their face, cracking the whip on them. He would just show you exercises, workouts you could do in your chair, on your couch. And let me read this little section to you from Wikipedia about the Jack LaLanne fitness show. I think this is fascinating. Jack LaLanne often used his white German Shepherd dog, Happy, in his program. The dog's tricks attracted children to the program so that LaLanne could say to the children, "You go get mother or daddy, grandmother, grandfather, whoever is in the house. You go get them and you make sure they exercise with me." See, isn't that a nicer way of getting people excited about working out and drawing in the audience? I don't see why that kind of approach wouldn't work now, why you have to go the lowbrow kind of scumbag way and make it about embarrassing people and hurting them. Anyway, it was a different era, but my point is that if you could have a weight loss fitness show that was successful all those decades ago, long before any of this stuff was mainstream, and it could run for that long and have that many viewers, why couldn't you do something like that today, where the theme of the show is much more upbeat and positive and realistic? So let me know what your thoughts are. If you saw the documentary, or if you used to watch The Biggest Loser show, if you can justify it, or if you have, if your opinions have changed on it over the years, I'd be interested to hear.